The bruises on her neck were a territorial violation, a declaration of unauthorized violence in the one place Choi Dong-wook considered sacred ground, his establishment, his domain, his employee. The man who had marked Barbara Perkins didn't understand the rules of this city, didn't know that certain lines, once crossed, carried consequences written in blood and political ruin. She murmured something about an accident, her fingers already rising to adjust her collar. But Dong-wook had made his decision the moment that fabric slipped. The bastard responsible had just become a problem requiring permanent erasure. Before we continue this story and discover what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. The Black Orchid was winding down for the night. The last remnants of the city's elite filtered past the unmarked entrance, their expensive suits and whispered conversations disguising transactions that would never appear in official records. Traditional Korean melodies drifted through custom speakers, a deliberate contrast to the modern brutality of the organization that owned every brick of this building. Choi Dong-wook watched from the shadows of his private mezzanine office, a vantage point designed for exactly this purpose: observation without being observed. His fingers rested on a crystal tumbler of Glenfiddich, untouched. Below him, the dining floor emptied table by table, and his focus remained locked on a single figure, moving through the organized chaos of closing duties. 3 months. That's how long Barbara Perkins had worked here. That's how long he'd been cataloging the small details that composed her. The precise economy of her movements when she cleared tables. The way she'd initially met his eyes with a directness that most of his own men couldn't manage. How she'd actually laughed when his head chef Jun made terrible puns about kimchi fermentation. He shouldn't be watching her this closely. She was staff. He maintained strict boundaries about such things. Lines that kept his world orderly, his organization functional, and his conscience from requiring examination. But Barbara had a way of making him reconsider those carefully constructed rules. Something had changed 2 weeks ago. The brightness in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a constant vigilance that he recognized intimately, the hyper-awareness of prey. Her shoulders had begun curving inward, her sleeves mysteriously lengthening despite the kitchen heat. She flinched now at sudden movements, at raised voices that weren't even directed at her. But never at him. Never at his voice, his approach, his presence. Like some instinct deeper than logic, understood the difference between men who made empty threats and men who simply acted. Dong-wook tracked her progress across the floor now, noting details his security team missed while they discussed tomorrow's shipment routes. The white-knuckled grip on her serving tray, the shallow breathing pattern when customers moved too close, the deliberate angle she maintained, keeping the right side of her neck turned away from direct light. She approached Mr. Huang's table, a city councilman who visited monthly for meetings that would horrify his constituents. Barbara set down the complimentary dessert with practiced efficiency, her smile professional and hollow. Then it happened. Mr. Huang's chair scraped back unexpectedly. Barbara pivoted to avoid collision, and for exactly 3 seconds, the high collar of her uniform shifted. Dong-wook's hand tightened on his glass. A sickly constellation of purple-green spread across the side of her neck. Not the faded yellow of old bruises, but the deep, fresh discoloration of recent violence. Finger marks. 4 distinct impressions, where someone had gripped her throat with enough force to leave a signature of cruelty on her skin. The sounds of the restaurant faded. Dong-wook's vision narrowed to those marks, his mind already processing angles, pressure points, the exact size of the hand that had created them. Male. Average build. Right-handed based on the thumb placement. Someone who'd done this before. The positioning showed experience, intent to control rather than kill. Barbara's hand flew to her collar, yanking it back into place. Her eyes swept the room in panic, checking if anyone had noticed. When her gaze accidentally met his through the office glass, she froze. He didn't look away. Didn't soften his expression or offer false comfort. He simply watched as the realization crossed her face. Someone had seen. Someone new. She broke eye contact first, retreating toward the kitchen with movements that barely contained the urge to run. Dong-wook set down his glass with controlled precision. He pressed the intercom button on his desk once. In the security room, 3 floors below, that single press would route directly to Junwoo's encrypted phone. His enforcer answered on the first ring. "Boss? My office." "Now?" Dong-wook's voice carried the temperature of winter steel. And bring me everything: financial records, security footage, phone logs, known associates. I want a complete file. On who? Dongwook's reflection stared back at him in the office glass, a man whose sister had died screaming for help that never came. Killed by a politician's son who walked free because power protected its own. He'd built this empire from that single failure, transformed himself into the kind of force that could never be ignored or dismissed again. The man who put his hands on Barbara Perkins, he said quietly. Find him before dawn. And then? Then we remind this city what happens when someone violates my territory. He ended the call and stood, his gaze returning to the kitchen doors where Barbara had disappeared. Behind him, the city lights sparkled with false innocence, unaware that in the next 72 hours, its entire political structure would begin to burn. The man who'd touched her had made a fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed his power made him untouchable. He'd forgotten that in this city, there were two kinds of power, the kind that hid behind laws and press conferences, and the kind that rewrote the rules entirely. Choi Dong-wook had spent 15 years building the second kind, and he was about to teach someone the difference. Jun-woo arrived in 4 minutes flat, which meant he'd been in the building. Smart. The enforcer had learned years ago that when Dong-wook's voice dropped to that particular register, calm, quiet, absolutely lethal proximity mattered. Close the door. Jun-woo obeyed, his expression neutral but his posture alert. He'd served under Dong-wook for 8 years, since the bloody consolidation of the 3 rival factions that had once fractured Korean organized crime in the city. He knew when his boss was strategizing and when he was already 10 moves ahead. This was the latter. Barbara Perkins, Dong-wook said, turning from the window. Tell me what you know. Your server. Started 3 months ago. Clean background check, no criminal record, no debts, no family connections to any organizations. 27 years old. Graduated Howard University with honors. Works 2 jobs, this one and weekend shifts at a community center in Anacostia. Jun-woo paused. She's good at her job. The kitchen staff likes her. June says she actually listens when he explains the menu. Why is she working 2 jobs with a degree? Student loans, medical bills for her grandmother, the usual weight that crushes people in this country. Dong-wook filed that away. Vulnerability, pressure points. Not for exploitation, never that, but understanding someone's burdens meant knowing how to properly protect them. It was a principle his organization had operated on since his grandfather's time. Know your territory, know your people, eliminate threats before they metastasized. Barbara had become part of his territory the moment she'd walked through those doors. He hadn't planned it, hadn't announced it, but somewhere between her first shift and tonight, she'd crossed an invisible threshold in his mind. She'd earned June's respect, which wasn't easily given. She'd never once treated the Korean staff with the subtle condescension he'd witnessed from countless others. She'd learned basic phrases in Korean greetings, thank yous because she'd wanted to, not because anyone required it. The organization had a code, unwritten but absolute. You protected your territory. You protected your people. And you made examples of those who violated that protection. Consequences so severe that others would remember the lesson for generations. Someone hurt her, Dong-wook said. Recent, within the last week, maybe less. Bruises on her neck, finger marks. Jun-woo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Good. His enforcer understood the implications immediately. I need everything, Dong-wook continued. Who she's dating, who she's dated, ex-boyfriends, rejected advances, colleagues from her other job, everyone in her orbit. Phone records, social media, security footage from her building if you can access it, credit card statements showing where she's been. I want to know who had the opportunity and the audacity. Time frame? Complete file by dawn. Preliminary suspects by 4 a.m. Jun-woo nodded once. Do we have a preferred approach once we identify him? That depends on who he is. Dong-wook's voice carried the weight of 15 years building an empire from ash and grief. If he's nobody, some drunk boyfriend with a temper, we handle it cleanly. He disappears. She's protected. Life continues. And if he's somebody? Dong-wook thought of his sister. Thought of the politician's son who'd raped and murdered her, who'd walked free because his father had connections, money, power. Thought of the rage that had built inside a 22-year-old Dong-wook until it forged him into something harder than steel, colder than winter. Then we get creative, he said quietly. Men who hide behind power need to learn that some forces don't recognize their shields. We'll strip away everything he thinks protects him. We'll make him understand that he chose the wrong victim in the wrong establishment. Junwoo's phone was already out, messages firing to their network. The hacker, the corrupt police contacts, the private investigators who specialized in finding what people desperately wanted hidden. One more thing, Dongwook added. This stays between us for now. No one approaches Barbara, no one asks questions, no one makes her feel watched or threatened. She's frightened enough. Understood, boss. As Junwoo left, Dongwook returned to the window. Below, the city continued its performance of normalcy. Somewhere out there, a man was sleeping peacefully, unaware that he'd just become the focus of an organization that had toppled politicians, bankrupted corporations, and rewritten entire neighborhoods. He'd touched something that belonged to Choi Dong-wook's world. The consequences would be surgical, devastating, and absolutely permanent. The file arrived at 3:47 a.m., 13 minutes ahead of Dong-wook's deadline. He'd been awake the entire night, reviewing financial reports that no longer held his attention, his mind circling the problem like a predator, waiting for prey to reveal itself. Junwoo entered without knocking, which meant the news was exactly as bad as Dong-wook had suspected. "You're going to want to sit down for this, boss." Dong-wook remained standing. "Tell me." Junwoo dropped a tablet on the desk, the screen illuminated with a professional headshot, a man in his early 40s, handsome in that calculated political way, with steel-gray temples and the kind of smile that promised empathy while delivering nothing. The caption beneath read, "Elias Thorne, Chief of Staff to Mayor Richardson." "The city's conscience," Junwoo said, his voice carrying undisguised contempt. "That's what the Washington Post called him last year, progressive reformer, anti-corruption crusader. He's behind every major policy initiative this administration has pushed: police oversight, affordable housing, education funding. The mayor doesn't take a shit without Thorne's approval." Dong-wook picked up the tablet, swiping through the file. Campaign photos, charity galas, Thorne shaking hands with senators, smiling beside community activists, receiving awards for public service. The armor of respectability, polished to a mirror shine. Keep going. They met 4 months ago at a political fundraiser where Barbara was working catering through her weekend job. He approached her, apparently charmed by her intelligence. Asked her out. She said yes. Junwoo's jaw tightened. It lasted 6 weeks, then she tried to end it. The next photos showed Barbara and Thorne together: restaurant dinners, a weekend trip to Annapolis, his arm around her waist at a gallery opening. In the early images, her smile looked genuine. In the later ones, it had become a mask. "He didn't accept the breakup," Dong-wook said. "Not a question." "No. Our police contact accessed the incident reports Barbara filed, 3 of them over the past month, each one documenting escalating harassment and threats. The last one, filed 8 days ago, mentioned physical assault." Junwoo pulled up another document. Every single report was buried. Never investigated, never assigned a detective, never entered into the official system. Thorne has the police department in his pocket. Worse than that, he is the pocket. The current police chief owes his appointment entirely to Thorne's recommendation. Half the command staff considers him untouchable. He's the administration's golden boy, the man who's supposed to reform the entire system. Junwoo's disgust was palpable. He used that power to silence her. Called her twice from blocked numbers, said if she continued making accusations, he'd destroy her career, her reputation, and make sure her grandmother lost her Medicaid coverage. Dong-wook felt something cold and familiar settle into his chest. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic abuse enabled by institutional power, the exact confluence of forces that had killed his sister and taught him that legal justice was a fiction designed to protect predators with the right connections. "There's more," Junwoo said quietly. "Our background check went deep. Thorne has a pattern. 4 other women over the past decade, all service workers or junior staffers, all minority, all threatened into silence. One took a settlement and signed an NDA. The others just disappeared from the city entirely, too terrified to even exist in the same zip code as him." The tablet displayed a photo of Thorne at a press conference, his expression radiating righteous conviction as he discussed police accountability and protecting vulnerable communities. The hypocrisy was so absolute it became almost artistic. "Boss," Junwoo said carefully. If we move against him directly, we're not just dealing with one man. We're taking on the mayor's office, the police department, every political operative in this city. They'll burn the entire organization to protect him. Federal investigations, asset seizures, RICO charges, they'll throw everything at us. Dong-wook set down the tablet with deliberate precision. He thought of Barbara's frightened eyes when their gazes had met. Thought of the way she'd clutched her collar, desperate to hide evidence of trauma that the system had already decided didn't matter. Thought of his sister's broken body and the politician's son who'd faced no consequences. Then we don't move directly, he said. We make them destroy him themselves. Junwoo processed the words for exactly 3 seconds before understanding dawned. You want to weaponize the system against itself. Elias Thorne built his power on a foundation of public trust and political protection, Dong-wook said, his voice carrying the calculated precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. We're going to excavate that foundation until the entire structure collapses, and we're going to do it using the very institutions he corrupted to abuse those women. He moved to the wall safe behind his desk, entering the combination that only 3 people in the organization knew. Inside sat documents that represented 15 years of insurance leverage on judges, politicians, police commanders, federal agents. Information that could topple careers or save them, depending on how it was deployed. A bullet would be cleaner, Junwoo observed. Faster, less risk of exposure. A bullet would make him a martyr. The progressive reformer assassinated by organized crime, probably by those very elements he fought so hard to expose. Dong-wook's smile held no warmth. They'd use his death to justify a crackdown that would cripple every operation we've built. Barbara would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, wondering when his political allies would seek revenge. He extracted a specific file, one marked with a simple designation, DH Network Infrastructure. No, Dong-wook continued. We're going to destroy Elias Thorne the way men like him deserve to be destroyed. We'll strip away his respectability, expose his corruption, and let the system he manipulated devour him piece by piece. When we're finished, his name will be synonymous with hypocrisy and abuse. History will remember him as exactly what he is, a predator who weaponized progressive politics to hunt vulnerable women. Junwoo's expression shifted to something approaching satisfaction. You're going to make him infamous. I'm going to make him a cautionary tale. Dong-wook checked his watch. 4:23 Get Dae-hyun. Tell him to clear his schedule for the next 72 hours. This is priority alpha. He's not going to like being pulled from the cryptocurrency project. He'll like what I'm about to pay him for this. 30 minutes later, Dae-hyun arrived at the Black Orchid's sub-basement, a space that officially didn't exist in any building schematic, accessible only through a reinforced door hidden behind wine storage. The hacker was 29 years old, rail-thin, with the pallor of someone who considered sunlight a personal offense. He'd been recruited from a federal cybercrime task force 6 years ago, after Dong-wook had offered him something the FBI never could: unlimited resources and absolute moral flexibility. Boss, Dae-hyun said, setting up his laptop array on the steel table. Junwoo mentioned this is delicate. It's surgical, Dong-wook corrected. He slid Thorne's file across the table. Elias Thorne, Chief of Staff. I need everything: financial records, emails, text messages, hidden accounts, offshore holdings, every piece of digital communication he's ever sent. I want to know about money he's moved, favors he's traded, deals he's made in shadows while smiling for cameras. Dae-hyun's fingers were already flying across keyboards, multiple screens illuminating with code and access protocols. Federal security clearance, government encrypted communications, probably multiple layers of institutional protection. This isn't some mid-level bureaucrat hiding a gambling problem. This is going to require penetrating systems that actively monitor for intrusion. Can you do it? Of course I can do it. Question is how much noise we make and how long before they realize someone's inside their networks. Dong-wook leaned forward, his voice dropping to that register that made even loyal men nervous. Then make no noise. Move like smoke. I don't care if it takes 72 hours of continuous work. Find me something irrefutable: financial corruption, bribery, embezzlement, anything that destroys his credibility completely. Something so damning that even his political allies can't protect him without destroying themselves. Dae-hyun grinned, the expression of a craftsman presented with a worthy challenge. You want to burn his life down? I want to burn his life down, Dong-wook confirmed, and make the entire city watch it happen. I want every news outlet, every oversight committee, every political enemy he's ever made to feast on his corpse. And I want him to know, in those final moments before everything collapses, that he brought this on himself the moment he put his hands on someone under my protection. When do you need this? Yesterday. Dae-hyun cracked his knuckles, screens already filling with penetration vectors and access points. Then I better get started. Barbara arrived at his office at 2 p.m., summoned by a text that had been deliberately vague. Need to discuss a private matter. Come to my office when your shift ends. Dong-wook had spent the morning ensuring the restaurant was empty except for essential security, creating a space where she could react without witnesses, without the performance of composure that survival had taught her to maintain. She knocked twice, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from expecting another threat, another powerful man demanding something she couldn't afford to refuse. Come in. She entered, closing the door behind her with movements that were too controlled, too careful. Her uniform collar was positioned precisely to hide the bruises, and she'd added a silk scarf that complemented nothing but served its purpose perfectly. Her eyes swept the office, cataloging exits, measuring distances, calculating risk, prey behavior, honed by experience. Miss Perkins, please sit. I prefer to stand, Mr. Choi. Her voice carried professional politeness wrapped around steel. If this is about my performance, it's about Elias Thorne. The name hit her like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, her hand instinctively rising to her neck before she caught herself. For exactly 3 seconds, she stood frozen, processing the implications of those 2 words. Then her survival instincts kicked in with a force that Dong-wook recognized intimately, the desperate scramble to deny, deflect, protect. I don't know what you're talking about. The words came too fast, rehearsed from repetition. I don't know anyone by that name. Barbara. He kept his voice level, non-threatening. I know about the fundraiser 4 months ago. I know about the 6 weeks you dated him. I know about the 3 police reports you filed documenting harassment and assault, all of which were buried by officers who answer to the administration he controls. Her breathing had gone shallow, panic flickering across her features like lightning. How? She stopped herself, shaking her head violently. No, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not. I know he threatened your grandmother's Medicaid coverage if you continued speaking about what he did to you. That detail, specific, intimate, the kind of cruelty only a victim would know, shattered her defensive wall completely. Her legs seemed to lose strength, and she grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. When she looked at him, genuine terror had replaced caution. What do you want? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Did he send you? Is this some kind of warning? The assumption cut deeper than Dong-wook expected, that she would immediately conclude he was another weapon deployed by her abuser, another powerful man leveraging information to inflict harm. It spoke to how thoroughly Thorne had destroyed her ability to trust anyone with authority or resources. I want nothing from you, Dong-wook said carefully. I'm not working with him. I'm not his ally. I saw the bruises on your neck 2 nights ago, and I had my people investigate who put them there. Why? She demanded, anger suddenly flaring through fear. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I'm just someone who serves your drinks and clears your tables. Why would someone like you care about? Her voice cracked. This doesn't make sense. You work in my establishment. That makes you part of my territory, part of what I'm responsible for protecting. Protecting? She laughed, a bitter sound edged with hysteria. You run organized crime, Mr. Choi. I'm not stupid. I know what this place is, what you are. And now you're telling me you've been investigating my private life, collecting information about me, tracking down details about the worst thing that's happened to me, and I'm supposed to believe it's protection? Yes. Why? She repeated, her hands trembling despite her attempt to steady them. Men like you don't protect people like me. Men like you use people like me. So what do you really want? What's the price for whatever information you've collected? Dong-wook stood slowly, watching her flinch slightly at the movement. He kept his distance, remained non-threatening, let her see that he wasn't advancing on her space. The price, he said quietly, is that you let me handle Elias Thorne the way he deserves to be handled. The system failed you, Barbara. Let me be what the system refused to be. Barbara stared at him, searching his face for deception, for the angle she knew had to exist. Why? She asked again, the word breaking on exhaustion. Why would you risk anything for someone you barely know? Dong-wook moved to the window, his back to her a calculated vulnerability, showing trust by removing her from his line of sight. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with old grief. I had a sister, Minseo. She was 20 years old, studying political science at Georgetown, brilliant enough that professors said she'd change policy in this country. He paused, the memory requiring physical effort to extract. A congressman's son decided he wanted her. She refused him, so he raped her, beat her unconscious, and left her in an alley in DuPont Circle. Barbara's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silence. She survived 3 days in the hospital before the internal bleeding killed her, Dong-wook continued. The congressman's son was questioned once, with his family's lawyer present. He claimed consensual sex and an unfortunate accident. The investigation was closed within a week. Insufficient evidence. The prosecutor's office decided pursuing charges would be politically complicated. He turned back to face her, and for the first time Barbara saw past the controlled exterior to the wound beneath a grief so profound it had calcified into purpose. I was 22 years old, working mid-level enforcement for my uncle's organization, powerless to do anything except watch powerful men protect one of their own, while my sister's body went cold. His hands tightened into fists. I made a decision that night. I would never be powerless again. I would build something so formidable that when I said a man would face consequences, the universe itself would bend to make it true. Did you? Barbara stopped, reconsidering the question. Did I kill him? Dong-wook finished. Eventually. 5 years later, when I had consolidated enough power that his father couldn't touch me. But by then it was too late to matter. Minseo was still dead. Justice delayed is justice denied, and I learned that the hard way. He moved closer. Slowly enough that Barbara could retreat if she chose. She didn't. I built this empire on that failure, he said quietly. Every brick of power I've accumulated has been to ensure I never again have to watch someone I'm responsible for suffer while systems designed to protect them actively enable their abuser. You walked into my establishment 3 months ago, Barbara. You became my responsibility, and when I saw those bruises, I saw my sister's face in that hospital bed and I made myself a promise not this time. This time I have the power to act, and I will use every ounce of it. Barbara's eyes had filled with tears she refused to let fall. He'll destroy me. He has connections I can't even imagine. The police won't help me. The courts won't help me. Nobody. I will help you, Dong-wook interrupted, the words carrying absolute certainty. Elias Thorne thinks his political connections make him untouchable. He's about to learn that there are powers in this city that don't answer to mayors or police chiefs or public opinion. I'm offering you something the system never could: absolute protection and total retribution. And if I say no, then I'll still destroy him, Dong-wook said simply. But I'd prefer to do it with your blessing. Barbara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, something had shifted, fear giving way to desperate hope. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Dae-hyun emerged from the sub-basement 51 hours after he'd entered, looking like death animated by caffeine and vindictive purpose. He carried a single encrypted drive, and an expression that told Dong-wook everything he needed to know before a word was spoken. Tell me it's good, Dong-wook said. It's biblical. Dae-hyun plugged the drive into the secure laptop, pulling up spreadsheets that represented months of meticulous forensic accounting. Elias Thorne has been skimming from city infrastructure contracts for the past 4 years. Affordable housing projects, specifically the ones he champions publicly as his signature achievement. The irony wasn't lost on Dong-wook. How much? $2.3 million, funneled through shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands, then laundered through real estate investments under his wife's maiden name. Dae-hyun's fingers flew across the keyboard, highlighting transaction patterns. He'd take bids from construction companies, award contracts to the highest bidder, then receive kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. The affordable housing got built with the cheapest materials possible. Contractors pocketed the difference, and Thorne got his cut. And you can prove it? Bank records, wire transfers, email correspondence discussing the arrangements, recorded phone calls where he explicitly instructs contractors on payment structures. It's not circumstantial, it's a prosecutorial wet dream. Dae-hyun leaned back, satisfied. The man who built his career on anti-corruption has been systematically stealing from the city's most vulnerable residents while giving speeches about equity and justice. Dong-wook studied the documents, his mind already mapping the strategic deployment. A direct leak to media would be too obvious, too easy for Thorne's allies to dismiss as politically motivated. No, this needed to come from inside the system, from someone whose credibility was beyond immediate question. "Captain Marcus Webb," he said. Junwoo, who'd been standing silently in the corner, nodded understanding. "The police captain who buried Barbara's assault reports." "Exactly. He's been on Thorne's payroll for 3 years, burying inconvenient investigations and ensuring certain cases never see a detective's desk." Dong-wook pulled up Webb's file, which means when this information mysteriously appears in his possession, he'll face an impossible choice: bury it and risk his own exposure when it inevitably surfaces, or report it to internal affairs and betray the man who's been protecting his career. "He'll try to warn Thorne first," Junwoo observed. "Of course he will. Which is why we're going to ensure internal affairs receives an identical anonymous package 30 minutes before Webb does. When he calls Thorne in a panic, IA will already be opening their investigation. Webb will look complicit. Thorne will realize his protection has evaporated, and the entire network of corruption will start eating itself." Daehyun grinned. "Mutually assured destruction." "Precisely." Dong-wook checked his watch. 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. "Package it professionally. Make it look like a concerned whistleblower from the comptroller's office. Include enough documentation that they can't ignore it without obviously obstructing justice." By 9:30 a.m., 2 identical packages had been delivered, one to Captain Webb's home address, another to the Internal Affairs Bureau's anonymous tip line. Dong-wook monitored the fallout from his office, watching news feeds and listening to police scanner traffic that Daehyun had tapped into. At 10:47 a.m., Webb's panicked call to Thorne was intercepted and recorded. At 11:15 a.m., Internal Affairs formally opened an investigation into corruption allegations involving the Chief of Staff's office. At 11:52 a.m., the first news alert hit. "Breaking. Police investigate alleged financial impropriety linked to Mayor's Chief of Staff." By noon, the city had caught fire. The political detonation exceeded even Dong-wook's calculated expectations. By Friday morning, every major news outlet had picked up the story, and by afternoon, 3 city council members were calling for Thorne's immediate resignation. The mayor's office released a carefully worded statement expressing concern and promising full cooperation with investigators' political speak for cutting the anchor loose before it dragged the entire ship down. Thorne, predictably, went into survival mode with all the grace of a cornered animal. His first press conference, hastily arranged on the steps of City Hall, was a masterclass in deflection. He blamed political opponents, suggested the documents were fabricated by criminal elements seeking to undermine reform efforts, invoked his years of public service as evidence of his integrity. His voice carried the righteous indignation of a man who'd built a career on performative morality and couldn't comprehend that the performance had finally been exposed as fraud. "This is a coordinated attack," Thorne declared, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage, "by forces who oppose progress, who profit from the status quo, who see my work empowering marginalized communities as a threat to their power." Dong-wook watched the conference from his office, Barbara standing beside him. She'd been staying at the Black Orchid since their conversation, sleeping in one of the private rooms on the 3rd floor that were reserved for organizational business. Safe, but not secure enough for what was coming. "He's panicking," Barbara observed quietly. "I've never seen him lose control like this." "Panicked men are dangerous men," Dong-wook replied. "Especially ones who've never faced real consequences before. He's going to lash out, try to find someone to blame, someone to hurt." As if on cue, Thorne's statement took a darker turn. He began naming political rivals, suggesting organized crime connections, hinting at conspiracies that would sound absurd if they weren't coming from the mouth of the city's second most powerful official. It was a scorched earth strategy if he was going down. He'd drag everyone within reach into the flames. "Junwoo," Dong-wook said into his phone, "prepare the Bethesda safe house. Full security detail, rotating shifts. No one in or out without my explicit authorization." Barbara turned to him sharply. "What are you doing?" "Moving you somewhere Thorne can't reach, even if he becomes desperate enough to try." He met her gaze steadily. "Right now he's focused on political survival. But that won't last. When he realizes his career is finished, he'll start thinking about revenge. You're the witness who could testify about the assault, The one loose end he never properly silenced. You think he'd come after me? With all this attention on him? I think a man watching his entire life collapse is capable of anything. Dong-wook pulled up a security feed showing the safe house, a elegant townhouse in a quiet neighborhood, unmarked, protected by systems that rivaled embassy security. This isn't a request, Barbara. This is me keeping the promise I made to you. She studied the screen, then looked back at him with an expression caught between fear and something softer. You're really going to see this through? Until Elias Thorne is nothing but a cautionary tale in political science textbooks? Yes. He called up another feed. This one showing Thorne leaving City Hall, surrounded by lawyers, his face a mask of barely suppressed fury. And we're just getting started. By evening, Dae-hyun had prepared the second wave of leaks emails detailing Thorne's systematic targeting of the women who'd rejected him. Communications with Captain Webb about burying assault reports, text messages that revealed the cold calculation behind his public persona. The firestorm was about to become an inferno. The second wave of leaks hit Tuesday morning like a sledgehammer through stained glass. The Washington Post published excerpts from Thorne's emails, conversations with Captain Webb, explicitly discussing how to manage Barbara's assault complaints, text messages to political operatives about problem women who needed to be handled quietly, communications that stripped away any remaining pretense of innocence. By noon, the mayor had personally suspended Thorne pending investigation. By 3 p.m., the U.S. Attorney's Office announced they were opening a federal corruption probe. By evening, Thorne's wife had filed for divorce, and his attorney had resigned, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Lawyer speak for, my client is radioactive and I want distance. Dong-wook monitored it all from the safe house, where Barbara sat curled on the leather sofa, watching her abuser's empire crumble in real time on CNN. Thorne's professional headshot filled the screen while anchors discussed his fall from grace with the barely concealed glee that media reserved for hypocrites exposed. He still doesn't know it was you, Barbara said quietly. He thinks this is political opposition, rival factions, maybe even the mayor throwing him under the bus. Good, let him thrash in the dark. Dong-wook's phone buzzed with an update from Dae-hyun. Thorne had just fired his private security team, paranoid they might be leaking information to investigators. He's isolating himself, cutting ties with everyone who might actually protect him. Why would he do that? Because men like Thorne are fundamentally incapable of seeing themselves clearly. He's convinced himself he's the victim of a conspiracy, which means everyone around him becomes a potential traitor. Dong-wook pulled up security footage showing Thorne leaving his Georgetown townhouse, disheveled, unshaven, looking nothing like the polished political operative who'd stood on those City Hall steps days earlier. He's spiraling. By Wednesday, Thorne's social media accounts, previously managed by professional PR staff, began posting increasingly unhinged rants about political persecution and corrupt systems. He named enemies, real and imagined. He made veiled threats. He railed against the injustice of his treatment, while remaining conspicuously silent about the actual evidence against him. And then, late Thursday night, he mentioned Barbara by name. The post appeared at 2:47 a.m., clearly written in a state of sleepless fury. They want you to forget about the women who make false accusations to destroy good men. Ask Barbara Perkins about her role in this politically motivated attack. Dong-wook's phone exploded with alerts. Junwoo called within seconds. Boss, he just doxed her, posted her name publicly, connected her to the investigation. I saw it. Dong-wook was already pulling up enhanced security protocols. He's shifted targets. This isn't about political survival anymore, this is about revenge. Barbara had gone pale, staring at her phone where Thorne's post was already being screenshotted and shared across social media. He's telling people I'm responsible. He's making me the villain. He's making you a target, Dong-wook corrected. Which means he's planning to act on it. Dae-hyun's voice came through the secure channel. Boss, I'm tracking his digital footprint. He's been searching for Barbara's address, her family members, her grandmother's care facility. He's doing reconnaissance. Dong-wook's expression went cold. How recently? Last search was 18 minutes ago. Then we're out of time. Dong-wook stood, signaling to his security detail. He's going to make a move tonight, and when he does, we'll be waiting. Thorne's rental car, a nondescript Honda Civic, paid for in cash. An amateur's attempt at stealth pulled up outside Barbara's old apartment building in Columbia Heights at 11:43 p.m. Dae-hyun had been tracking his phone's GPS for the past 2 hours, watching the erratic driving pattern of a man who'd checked the same address 3 times before committing. "He's there," Daehyun reported through the secure channel. "Just parked across the street." Dongwook was already moving, Junwoo driving with the controlled aggression of someone who understood that timing was everything. They were 4 minutes out, maybe 3 if traffic cooperated. Behind them, 2 additional vehicles carried backup, 6 men total, all armed, all understanding that tonight's operation required absolute precision. "Barbara's apartment has been empty for 2 weeks, Junwoo said, navigating through a red light. "He's going to realize she's not there. By then, it won't matter." Dongwook watched the security feed on his phone, camera footage pulled from the building's exterior system that Daehyun had accessed hours ago. Thorne sat in his car, working up courage or perhaps convincing himself this was justified. He's already committed to the act. At 11:47 p.m., Thorne exited the vehicle. He'd abandoned any pretense of his former sophistication, wrinkled dress shirt, no tie, 2 days of stubble, eyes that carried the manic energy of someone who'd stopped sleeping. In his right hand, partially concealed by his jacket, was something metallic. A gun, Dongwook realized. The man had actually brought a weapon. Thorne approached the building's entrance, tried the security door, found it locked. For a moment he hesitated, and Dongwook thought he might retreat, might recognize the insanity of what he was attempting. Instead, Thorne pulled out his phone and dialed. Barbara's phone sitting on the safe house coffee table began ringing. She stared at the screen, Thorne's name displayed with sickening familiarity. "Don't answer," Dongwook said through his own phone, though she could hear him clearly on speaker. "Let him leave a message." The call went to voicemail. Seconds later, Thorne's voice emerged, breathless and fractured. "Barbara, Barbara, I know you're in there. I know you did this, fed them lies, destroyed everything I built. You think you can hide from me? You think your new friends can protect you?" His voice cracked. "I'm coming up. We're going to finish this conversation." On the security feed, Thorne forced the entrance door, the cheap lock giving way after 3 violent kicks. He disappeared into the building's stairwell, heading for the 3rd floor, for an apartment that had been strategically emptied and prepared. 2 minutes, Junwoo said, the vehicle screaming around a corner. "He's on the stairs," Daehyun reported, reaching the 3rd floor now. Dongwook watched Thorne emerge from the stairwell, approach Barbara's former apartment, try the handle. Locked. He pounded on the door, shouting her name. When no answer came, he stepped back and kicked. Once, twice, the door splintering on the 3rd impact. Thorne stumbled into the empty apartment, and even through the grainy security footage, Dongwook could see the moment comprehension dawned. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. No one had lived here for weeks. He'd been led into a trap. Junwoo's vehicle pulled up outside just as Thorne, panicked and cornered, ran back toward the stairwell. Dongwook exited calmly, adjusting his jacket, and walked into the building like he owned it. Because in every way that mattered, he did. Thorne hit the stairwell at full sprint, his breath ragged with panic and rage. He made it down half a flight before he saw Dongwook standing on the landing below, blocking the exit, flanked by Junwoo and 2 other men whose presence promised violence held carefully in check. "Going somewhere, Mr. Thorne?" Thorne froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun in his waistband. 4 weapons appeared in response, trained on him with the casual efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times. He slowly raised his hands, the gun visible now, and something like understanding began dawning in his bloodshot eyes. "You," Thorne breathed. "This whole thing, the leaks, the investigation, this was you?" "I simply provided the truth to people who'd been deliberately kept from it," Dongwook said, descending the stairs with measured steps. "The corruption was yours, Thorne. The abuse was yours. The systematic destruction of women who refused you was yours. I just made sure the city could finally see what kind of man wears a progressive's mask." "Over some waitress?" Thorne's voice cracked between disbelief and fury. "You destroyed my career, my marriage, my entire life over some—" The gun appeared in Dongwook's hand so quickly that Thorne's next word died in his throat. "Her name is Barbara Perkins, and she wasn't some disposable conquest in your power fantasy. She was under my protection, which made her untouchable. But you were too arrogant to understand that there are forces in this city that don't answer to your political connections." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Dongwook had timed this perfectly. The anonymous tip about a suspended city official attempting to assault his accuser would reach patrol units in exactly 90 seconds. Thorne would be arrested with a weapon, caught in an act of witness intimidation, the final nail in a coffin Dong-wook had been methodically constructing for days. "You're going to prison," Dong-wook said quietly. "Federal charges for corruption, local charges for assault, and attempted intimidation. And every day you spend in a cell, you'll remember that this happened because you put your hands on someone I claimed as mine. She'll never be yours," Thorne spat, desperate defiance. "Women like her, they see through men like you. You think you're her savior? You're just another—" Junwoo's fist ended the statement, a precise strike that dropped Thorne to his knees. By the time police flooded the stairwell 40 seconds later, Dong-wook and his men had vanished through an exit that wouldn't appear on any building schematic, leaving Thorne surrounded by officers, his weapon visible, his guilt undeniable. The arrest made national news by morning. By afternoon, the U.S. attorney announced additional charges. By evening, 3 more women had come forward with their own stories, emboldened by Thorne's fall. The scandal metastasized into something larger: investigations into the police department's systemic failure to investigate powerful men, oversight committees examining the mayor's office, calls for reform that would reshape the city's power structure for years. The city was burning exactly as Dong-wook had promised. At the safe house, Barbara watched the coverage in silence, Dong-wook beside her. When the news showed Thorne being led into federal court in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit, she finally spoke. "It's really over." "It's over," Dong-wook confirmed. "He'll never touch you again. Never threaten your family. Never walk free." She turned to him, tears streaming down her face, not from fear this time, but from something that looked almost like relief, like the first breath after drowning. "You burned the entire city for me. I told you I would." Barbara moved closer, her hand finding his, and for the first time since the bruises had appeared on her neck, she looked like someone who understood what safety actually meant. "If this story of justice, power, and redemption captivated you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel to dive into more thrilling tales where the powerless find unexpected protectors and the corrupt face consequences they never saw coming. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we release the next chapter in stories that explore the dark intersections of power, loyalty, and vengeance. Comment below and tell us, what did you think of Dong-wook's methods? Was his justice justified? Would you want to see Barbara and Dong-wook's story continue? What should happen to Captain Webb and the other corrupt officials? Where are you watching from? We love hearing from our global community. Share this story with someone who loves complex characters, strategic revenge, and narratives that challenge the boundaries between right and wrong. Like this video if you believe that sometimes, when the system fails, justice requires a different kind of power. Your engagement helps us create more stories that matter: tales of protection, retribution, and the complicated morality of those who operate outside the law to deliver what the law cannot. What story should we tell next? Let us know in the comments. Remember, sometimes the monster you need isn't the one you expected. Sometimes salvation comes from the shadows. Subscribe now. The next story is waiting.